So to begin, today is October 15th, and on the Ides of October kind of makes, we're heading in towards Halloween. Maybe it's a good time to start talking about creepy crawlies and dilapidated buildings and things that look like haunted houses. So all these nightmares will be part of the presentation today. But I first want to begin by saying that, for the most part, we know that Santa Monica's housing stock is well preserved, and we appreciate the property owners who invest in their properties and maintain them well. And we really don't hear from the tenants on those properties. Everything is going smoothly. There's pride in ownership, and tenants have reasonable expectations about what to expect from their landlords. So we do appreciate that. Today we're going to talk about some of the problem areas, however, and there are many gray areas, and I think landlords often want to know what's their responsibility, what's the tenant's responsibility. Tenants want to complain that the owners aren't taking care of things as well as they might like. But really we're going to try to clarify what the laws say about maintenance of residential rental properties. So today's seminar is really co-presented by the Santa Monica Rent Control Board, the staff at the Rent Control Department, the LA County Department of Public Health, and the City of Santa Monica's Code Enforcement Division. We are going to have general Q&A sessions at the end of each presentation. So if you would hold your questions until to the actual question slide, that will help us move through what is a fairly long presentation. And also, if you can, try to make your questions of general interest. So if it's something very specific to your situation and it wouldn't be of interest to a larger group, it would be better to contact us directly at the office and we can talk you through that situation. Today's seminar is being recorded by City TV, and we will post it up on our website. I'm not sure how quickly they'll get the video together, but we'll also send all of you who have registered and for whom we have your email a copy of the presentation, so you will get all of these slides after the event. So with that, I'll introduce the presenters. My name is Dan Costello. I'm the Public Information Manager for Rent Control. Presenting on behalf of the Department of Public Health is Yuan-Chi Chang, Dr. Yuan-Chi Chang. And from Code Enforcement, we have Armando Anga. He's a Code Enforcement Supervisor. So generally, all of these agencies have policies that disfavor the deterioration of housing stock, and each of us will kind of go through what our agencies handle. That said, there are several other things that relate to maintenance of properties that we can't really go into because they are state law issues and we are really not the experts on those. And primarily, the two major issues are noticing for entry and when an owner can enter a unit legally. So we are going to not really talk about those things. What I can say is under the rent control law, if a tenant has made a request for maintenance or repairs and then they refuse the owner access to the unit, that could be a reason for eviction. And tenants have to, owners have to give tenants a warning letter saying that they're denying that access, but tenants should be careful. Once they make a request for repairs, they do have to cooperate with the owner to let those repairs be done. Another area that's not really our area of expertise is harassment. So tenants may complain that owners are not maintaining a unit as a way of trying to get them to move out. Those complaints really should be directed to the city attorney's office. Their bar for determining harassment is really that the owner's trying to get the tenant to leave. But any questions like that, we're probably going to defer to the city attorney's office. So under rent control, there are three categories of things that need to be maintained. First, there are deteriorated conditions, and I'll give you examples of all of these. And there are what we call base amenities. I'll define what those are. So those are things that may not be deteriorated conditions, but things that are associated with the unit and should be maintained for the rent dollar. And last, a category called housing services. And these are somewhat like amenities, but they include even the right to have a roommate. It's not really a maintenance issue, but under the rent control law, it is something that would have to be maintained. Our remedies for these issues really run from free mediation services to possible reductions in rent. In extreme cases, we also can prohibit rent increases, so deny the general adjustments if there are outstanding problems with the property. And in very extreme cases, we can even block the owner's right to set a new market rent for an incoming tenant if the prior tenant vacated when there were serious code violations. So one of the first questions that often comes up from landlords is, okay, I have to maintain all of these things, but what if I'm not the problem? What if it's the tenant who caused the problem? In general, owners are required to maintain the properties no matter who caused the problem. So even if the tenant broke the window, it is the owner's responsibility to repair the window. The owner can give the tenant the bill and ask the tenant to pay that bill. And if the tenant refuses, the owner's remedy is to file in small claims court and try to get the tenant to pay. We don't have any remedy for it under rent control, but that is how it would play out. Now, of course, it may be difficult for an owner to prove, in some cases, how the problem was caused. But I just have an interesting story to share from this week, and I hope these people are not here, but a tenant called because she was having a problem with her toilet and complained to her landlord. And the landlord did send over a plumber, and the plumber did a little investigation and ended up pulling out her debit card from the toilet. And I don't think she meant to deposit that, but the landlord rushed over and quickly took a picture of the plumber pulling out the card, and I trust that the owner is probably going to use that as evidence that the tenant caused the problem. So, our first category of things that might be a reason for a rent decrease are deteriorated conditions. And these are all specified, most of them are specified in the rent control regulations. It's regulation 4200, and you can get to that from our website if you look at rent control law and regulations and go to chapter 4, so it would be section 4200. But conditions can also be things that are not expressly listed. So, there's a kind of a short list of things that might be problems or common problems that apartments have, but there could be other things that might warrant a rent decrease if they're not maintained. Another question we have often is, are new owners responsible for deferred maintenance? And the answer is yes. So whoever the owner of the property is, they do have to maintain the property. Later, I will explain what the rent control process is when tenants have complaints and how we hear them. The other category of things that have to be maintained are what we call base amenities. So things like, these are still some of the deteriorated conditions. This is just a sample from the list, but it includes things like painting, floor coverings, leaks, plumbing problems, insect infestations, and so on. So you will see that there is a lot of overlap between the kind of things that rent control can deal with and things that perhaps the health department can deal with or code enforcement deal with. For rent control, we can take decreased petitions on things that are not necessarily serious habitability issues. So they could be somewhat subjective conditions, but generally everything has to be maintained in what a reasonable person would expect to be good condition. So these are some examples of conditions. Also, there could be conditions outside of the unit that would warrant a decrease, and these include dangerous porches or walkways, electrical problems, broken windows or doors or elevators. Not all of these things would we necessarily be the first agency to turn to, but I think as you hear today's presentation, you'll get a better idea of who is the best agency, or which agency is best to handle certain problems. So the other thing that we require to be maintained are what we call base amenities. And base amenities really have to do with when the tenant moved in. So for tenants who moved in prior to January 1st of 1999, the base amenities are those housing services and amenities that came with the unit on April 10th of 1978. So the rent control law went into effect 40 years ago this year, on April 10th of 1979, and we went back 1 year to look at the pre-regulated market and had owners register what the rents were and what amenities came with that rent. And the basic idea is that to keep fairness, the owner has to maintain all of those amenities for the same rent dollar. For post January 1st, 1999 tenants, base amenities are those amenities and housing services that came with the unit when they moved in. So a pre-99 tenant might have had parking, and then that tenant vacates, this year, and the owner wants to re-rent the unit. They're free to rent it without parking, and no parking would be the base amenity for that new tenant. If they rent it with parking, then parking is a base amenity for that tenant. So even things like refrigerators that may have been left by a prior tenant, if you rent a unit to a new tenant and the refrigerator is there, that does have to be maintained by the owner. And the reason is that the tenant negotiating their rent considers all of the things that come with the unit, and all of those things then need to be maintained. Only for post-1199 tenancies, we also have another category of base amenities, and those are specifically parking, storage, or the right to have a pet that are added after the initial tenancy date. So let's say you rented that unit and it didn't have parking, and maybe you didn't have, if you're the owner, you don't have parking to offer, and 6 months down the road or a year later you do have parking, then you could make a separate agreement with the tenant for this added amenity. You negotiate an arm's length transaction for whatever that amenity is worth, and then you register that with rent control. It becomes part of the maximum allowable rent, and does have to be maintained. For the pre-99 tenancies, the question is often, where can I find information about those? So if you're a relatively new owner, you don't know what was provided on April 10th of 1978. Well, you can contact rent control, because either our printout will show it, or we can show you the original registration form that was filed by the owner, hopefully in 1979, and it listed what those amenities were. The pre-99 amenities, the list was fairly comprehensive. It had a lot of different things like drapes or window coverings, or whether or not it had a balcony or appliances. Post-99, the only thing that we ask you to register on the tenancy registration form is the parking amenity. That doesn't mean that all of the other things that came with the unit are not amenities. It's just that we don't have you register those. The pre-99 tenancies that have all those details are presumed to be correct. It could be that some evidence is produced that shows that there were additional amenities or that information was incorrect, and a hearing officer would decide whether or not something is a base amenity. All right. So some examples of unit-specific base amenities are carpet, storage, appliances, drapes, parking. You get that? There could be common area base amenities like play areas, swimming pools, certain kinds of landscaping, laundry facilities, recreational facilities, and even electrical vehicle charging if that is provided when the tenant moves in. There is a state law we want to mention that does require that an owner allow a tenant to install electric vehicle charging station on a property if there are 5 or more units. Owners are not required to provide additional parking to a tenant for that purpose, and all of the costs associated with that charging are the tenant's costs. And currently under state law, there is a requirement that the tenant also maintain a $1 million general liability policy that names the landlord as an additional insured. We don't enforce this state law, but just wanted to mention it as something that may come with the unit.
They just canceled the $1 million deal.
Okay, all right.
You don't need the $1 million.
Okay, all right. So Jay Johnson was letting us know what the state has done. I know that was a bill that was out there, so that policy is gone. So check. You can always go to the California Department of Consumer Affairs for information about state laws. They have a great landlord-tenant information service. So one of the other housing services, as I mentioned, are roommates. And under the rent control regulations, if a roommate is a base amenity, then then the tenants do have the right to replace a roommate on a one-for-one basis. So 2 people move in together and one of them leaves, and then that remaining tenant would have the right to replace the roommate. If an owner unreasonably refuses the tenant that right, the tenant can file a petition with us and have the rent reduced proportionately. So if there were 2 tenants and only one is allowed, we could reduce the rent 50%. So usually people comply with this. It's just, there's no requirement that owners make those replacement roommates tenants. They can just be lawful occupants. And when the named tenant is gone, the owner would have the right to set the rent at a market rate if they don't make that person a tenant. So there would be a qualifying vacancy. Some other housing services are on-site management. So sometimes we have properties that had a great on-site manager, and maybe there's a new owner who comes in and they hire an off-site management company, and the tenants kind of lose the convenience of having somebody that they can go to when they're locked out or some emergency like that. So we do consider on-site management as a base housing service. And another more unusual one is owner-paid utilities. So if there is either a master metered building or even individually metered units, and the owner pays for the utility from the start of the tenancy, this again for post-99 tenants, then the owner would have to continue to pay for those utilities. I won't get too much into that, but so what happens when there is a lack of maintenance? So rent control has 2 processes for dealing with this. The first is a petition for rent decrease, and then there's another kind of offshoot of that, which is a rent decrease for construction impacts. Since we are rent control, it's important to remember that the ultimate authority of the board is really to affect the rent levels. So we don't have the legal authority to force an owner to do anything. We can't force the owner to fix the plumbing. We can't force the owner to replace the drapes or carpeting. But what we can do is, if we find that those are base amenities and they're not being provided, have a hearing and potentially reduce the rent. The idea of the rent reduction is not meant really to be punitive. It's really meant to encourage the owner to do that maintenance. And I'll talk about how this process works. The rent decreases for construction impacts. As many probably know, Santa Monica is in this development boom right now. The median rent last year for a one bedroom was $2,400. So there's really an incentive for owners to fix up their units and get the best rates for them. The result, or I guess the offshoot of that, is that there's a lot of construction going on, and it can be disruptive to tenants. And we'll talk a little bit more about the kind of impacts that might warrant a construction-related decrease in rent. So first, about the rent control petition for a rent decrease. So a tenant can file a rent decrease petition for those three reasons we talked about. So the owner's not making necessary repairs, amenities are not being maintained, or housing services are not being provided. Similarly, an owner can file a decrease petition because the owner would like to remove an amenity. So the owner may, let's say there is laundry on the property, and the owner no longer wants to maintain the laundry machines and the cost of the water, and wants to remove that as an amenity. Well, it is possible under the rent control law for an owner to do that. There would be, though, a reduction in the tenant's rents, for those who had laundry service as a base amenity. But if something is a base amenity, like laundry or parking, an owner cannot just simply no longer provide it and just tell the tenants that that's what's, that's going to be the future. Because it is a base amenity, they do have to, it's best if you work with us. The owner should file the petition, and it would be up to a hearing officer to determine how much rent should be reduced for the removal of that amenity. Last year, we had 97 petitions for rent decrease filed. That was kind of an uptick last year. It's certainly a small percentage of the number of controlled units, so that's a good thing. And I will say that 62% of the petitions that were filed by market rate tenants. Sometimes there's the perception that it's only the long-term tenants who are paying very low rent who are using rent control to have their rent reduced further, but it's kind of proportional to the breakdown in market rate units, people who moved in after 1/1/99 and people who moved in before 1/1/99. The process is that the tenant would make a written request to the landlord, so we do require that there be something in writing. Email is sufficient as a form of communication, but text is not, so we encourage people to put things into actual letters or send an email, and we will need to see a copy of that exact notice given to the landlord before we would accept a petition, and we'll only accept petitions for things that the owner has been duly noticed for. Tenants have to wait 30 days before they can file the petition with us. So once they give the notice to the landlord, they wait 30 days, giving the owner the opportunity to take care of those problems. If they're not resolved, then, as I said, they can file the petition. The notice to the landlord is actually good for 180 days, but after those 6 months, the tenant would have to re-notice the landlord about any conditions that continue to exist. We initially set mediation for the petitions that are filed, and we have very effective mediation. 63% of the petitions that are filed last year were either fully or partially resolved in mediation. If something isn't resolved in mediation, then it would go to a hearing. But if the mediator can get the parties to agree to some plan of action, then there would be a settlement agreement that gets recorded. If a petition does go to hearing, then both the tenant and the landlord can present their evidence. We typically, depending on what the issue is, we may also send an inspector to the unit, and the inspector would also provide testimony to the hearing officer regarding the problems that they saw on the property. Hearing officer will then write a decision, so and that decision becomes effective at least 30 days after the date of the decision. So everyone knows well in advance how much the rent can go down. Rent reductions can include reductions for conditions as of the date that the petition was filed. So if there are, let's say parking wasn't provided and the petition was filed in April and maybe the decision didn't come out until June, tenants can be compensated for that April and May, June month that they didn't have the parking. If our process is delayed for a good cause, typically for mediation, then the decreased periods don't count for that, that time period. Once there's a decision, either party can appeal to the Rent Control Board. So then that will be set for one of the board meetings, and the Rent Control Board will decide whether to maybe take the hearing officer's recommendation, or they may modify it, or they may even remand it back to the hearing officer for more information. But everybody has the chance to appeal to the Rent Control Board. Decreases are not stayed upon the decision of the hearing officer, so the rent reduction would go into effect even while the appeals process is in place. We do advise tenants, though, who have been granted a rent reduction to keep the money, because it may be that the Rent Control Board changes the amount that the tenant can withhold from rent, and the tenant would have to pay that back to the landlord. So, important to know that these decisions are not stayed. The amounts of the actual rent decreases are, again, in Regulation 4200. So it sets a range for each kind of condition. Hearing officers can go above or below that range with good cause. And the decreases are always from the maximum allowable rent. So sometimes the tenant's not even being charged the maximum allowable rent, but our regulations only allow us to reduce it from the maximum allowable rent. And some tenants who are paying less than the maximum allowable rent may decide not to file the petition because the owner then may decide to raise the rent above what they're actually paying. So you have to use some caution there. There is some flexibility for the hearing officer because there's a range of decreased amounts, and so they really have to look at the degree of the deterioration, how much maybe the tenant used an amenity, how much rent they're paying. So it's kind of an art to figure out just what would be the appropriate amount. And as I said, the hearing officer can go above or below the amount, and so can the board with good cause. Here's just a sample of some of the decrease amounts. So insect infestation can run from $15 a month to $175. Floor coverings, $15 to $330. Parking up to $550. Now, you have to keep in mind parking amenity might be a separate 2-car garage. And if that's taken away, that would have a certain higher value. So anyway, you can look at Regulation 4200 for the exact amounts. Once an owner repairs or restores the conditions for which there was a rent reduction, then the owner can request a compliance determination. So as each thing gets fixed, they come to us and say, all right, I fixed that now, so I want the rent restored for that particular thing. Reinstatement of the rent is retroactive to the date of the first rent payment due after the landlord corrected the defect, if the landlord requests compliance within 60 days. If they wait longer than 60 days, then reinstatement is retroactive to the date of the first rent payment due after the filing of the request for compliance. All of these things will be specified in a decision or an addendum to a decision if you're ever involved in one of those. And a tenant can appeal a request for compliance. So the tenant can say, no, they didn't really fix that problem, I still have it, and ask for a hearing on appeal. Now onto the construction-related decrease. This is a slightly different process than the standard rent control decrease. It begins really with us getting credible evidence that there is some problem on a property. Rather than the tenant notifying the landlord, we send a letter to the landlord and the tenants of the property saying, it looks like these things are going on, you can file a construction-related decrease petition. Doesn't mean that we're granting it, it just means that we will hear it. So we can reduce the rents when a unit is uninhabitable due to construction, or if construction substantially reduces a housing service, or if it interferes with the tenant's ability to occupy the unit as a residence. But we cannot reduce the rent if these are unavoidable construction impacts that are being carried out in a reasonable manner and on a reasonable time frame. So owners have the right to work on their units, work on the properties, they just have to do it in the right way. And we will often work with code enforcement, with owners who are planning major construction work and have them file a means and methods plan that maybe Armando will talk about. But we just want to set expectations for everybody about what is going on. Communication is a great thing. If you're going to be doing major work, please communicate with the owner. Please communicate with the tenants about what to expect. So the construction-related rent decrease is set out in Regulation 4400. It's in that same Chapter 4. And the decrease amounts can either be dollar amounts or percentages of the rent. So inadequate construction management, for example, is 10 to 75% of the rent. Safety can be 10 to 100% of the rent. Loss of access to stairs, walkways, hallways, $15 to $175, and so on. And unlike the rent decrease, the standard rent decrease process, the decreases awarded in a construction-related rent decrease are off of the rent that the current is actually paying, not their MAR. So tenants may go forward with a petition no matter what their MAR is. And the decreases are effective from the date that the condition began. And as with the regular petition, we offer mediation services. And so usually we can work something out and keep everybody happy. So with that, I'll take our first questions. Because this is being recorded by City TV, I would ask that all of you use the microphone. So I'm just going to pass down the microphone. And if you just raise your hand if you've got a question, thank you.
Hi there. I just wanted, you mentioned a couple things and I just wanted to get clarification. If the landlord is using this denying access as something that they're trying to get you out with, is there any way that you can protect yourself if they are falsely accusing you of denying access with a worker? I just wondered if you had any ideas about that.
Well, so that really would come down, because that really has to do with eviction and what possible eviction defense there would be. I'd really have to say you'd have to talk to an attorney.
Okay.
Because the attorneys who do that defense in court would know, maybe have some suggestions about how best to document what's going on.
Okay, and my other question is, if the original registration put out by the original owner for pre-99 tenants is pretty stark and doesn't show things like, the water spigot that's in front of your building or the clothing line or whatever, like doesn't show those things and you have to prove, for instance, the water spigot, like they suddenly just, I know they can cap it off and do that kind of thing, but if they start taking away rights within the first, I don't know, right, within 6 month period of time, they just start one by one, there's a new manager and they just start taking away these rights, which aren't really amenities, but they were always available to you when you moved in, and then suddenly, within a short period of time, they just start boom, 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 taking things away. Is there any protection, and or is there anything that I can do in that instance?
So the burden of proof in a decrease petition is on the tenant to show what the base amenity actually is. So it is difficult if that 1979 registration form doesn't have a whole lot of information. It could be that if you had neighbors who lived on the property at that time and who could provide testimony about what was there, that could be used by a hearing officer to determine the base amenity. Some things we would you could possibly look at building records to see was there ever a permit taken out to install a spigot after 1979, and you could make the case that, well, gosh, it must have been there in 1978. So.
And why do they have this law put into place for 78? Because it seems to completely be unhelpful with tenants who moved in prior to 99.
Right. Well, ideally, all of the owners would have complied with the rent control law when it started. There was a lot of resistance when rent control started, and so owners didn't necessarily list everything. We have pretty remarkably high compliance, though. I think you'll find those registration forms on just about every property. But we are limited because we have to associate the rent to, and all the amenities to the pre-regulatory day of April 10th, 1978. You may have remedies, let's say you moved in 86, and in your lease, the landlord was going to provide certain things. You may have a remedy to compel the owner to continue to provide those things, but that would be a legal process enforcing the terms of the agreement, not something that rent control can help with, because we can only help with base amenities.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. We are caught up in a limbo of our building has been sold twice. We have lived there for 47 years. We believe with my mother on doing things in a friendly, just manner, and to help if we can. We have even cleaned the surrounding areas and the steps because we have no manager now. We had no heater for a year. We had all the building changed the windows, and in the summer they put plastic all over the windows, and we had no way of having some oxygen in the building. Also, my mother suffers from panic attacks, and I have had to take her out of the building because there's construction, and of course they have to do it, I understand. But it's very inconvenient. I haven't even been able to work, and from the dust, also she's been coughing continuously. I just don't know what to do because I think we're catching a catch-22, like in a limbo. There's laws to protect the owner, and I understand, and there's laws to protect the tenant, but we seem to feel that we're the losing end.
I hear you. So, if construction is being done in an unreasonable manner, and maybe plastering up over the windows so you don't get any fresh air, might be something that we could help with. If your mother is experiencing adverse health effects from all of this, then you might want to talk with the city attorney's office about her rights, for accommodations if she has, a disability. Maybe the owner can do something to mitigate those effects. And certainly things like not having heat, you should definitely have contacted the city because that is a requirement, and the owner could have been compelled to provide that.
Okay, we are facing a third sale of the building now. So every time they sell the building, whatever problems we had in the past is like in limbo, like I explained, because who is responsible?
Well, as I said in the slide, so owners current owners or new owners are still responsible for deteriorated conditions. And whether, even if it happened before they purchased the property, they're still on the hook. You would have to avail yourselves of the remedy, that we have, either for a rent decrease or maybe a construction-related decrease, or possibly some kind of code enforcement action.
Hello. I have been in mediation before. And one question I have real quickly is that being recorded now? Because I went back and asked for an audio recording because I had retaliatory actions taken against me as a tenant. And they said no, but I hear that it is now being recorded. Is that true?
My current understanding is that it's not recorded. Those things are confidential. I think the negotiations within mediation are confidential. The ultimate settlement agreement, I think, is a public record, but the actual negotiations are confidential.
All right. Okay, the other thing is, I understand that I get a great rent for Santa Monica. I've been there 25 years, and I've done thousands of dollars of repairs myself, and now I'm on limited income as a senior. So I have asked a couple of years ago for, is that me? Hello? All right, so the problem is I asked for flooring, which I hadn't had for 20 years. And they were very gracious. This was before mediation. And said they'd put in Pergo. However, the landlord's son, who is inexperienced in repairs, wanted to do it himself. It took 1.5 to 2 months for 2 rooms upstairs. Do I have a right to complain? It was done in 15 to 30 minute increments. And what's my recourse?
Well, that's unfortunate. We only have the one remedy under rent control, which is to file the decrease petition. If, let's say you had filed for flooring and were granted some rent reduction, that rent reduction would have stayed in effect until there was compliance. So the longer an owner takes to fix a problem, the longer the decrease stays into effect.
So that's not my responsibility to ask for that and see that that's done.
Yeah.
So
I'm
there's
glad
a cost.
that they did fix it for you though, so that's good.
Right. It is good, and I appreciate that. But there's a price to pay for the hostility that recurs from.
Well, if you feel that an owner is harassing you, and again, that's trying to get you to move, and we can't control human behavior, but if it rises to a certain level where you feel uncomfortable and that you're being forced out, that is something to take to the city attorney's office.
City attorney. All right. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question about deferred maintenance. I live in a 16-story building and the plumbing is outdated by roughly 15 years according to the maintenance staff. We have frequent floods from pipes breaking or anyway, the most important thing is the floods from pipes breaking. And I had called in LA County Health about one of them and they said they could only address each burst one at a time, but if there's a pattern of it, how do you?
Right. We have had cases at rent control where there is a pattern, a recurring problem, and hearing officers can reduce the rent, and normally you're not allowed to file a petition for the same issue. Well, certainly not the same issue, but if it gets repaired, you can't file for 6 months from the date I think it's a hearing. So, but they can allow you to refile if it's a recurring condition like that, and you refile, and we try to expedite, but have you get the rent reduction, which is again our only remedy. If there's something systemically wrong, I don't know if the other agencies can deal with something like that. But if you're having recurring floods, that's not good. Okay, I can take one more question, and I got to turn it over to the next presenters. You may have an opportunity after their presentations to ask questions. Here you will.
I'm going to piggyback on hers. We're in our unit 17 years, and the manager, every time we brought up the carpeting, she has said, "Oh yeah, we'll do it." And I understand I have to get it in writing now, but she has said that we have to move all of our stuff out. And family of 4, and one piece of my furniture is quite heavy, and I'm like, really, you want me to take it down the stairs and move it? I get it's easier for them, but what's the rights really about having them do that?
That particular issue is not specified in our law, but the way that we have handled it, if you were to file a decrease petition because she doesn't replace the carpet, he or she, and we reduce the rent for that condition, then it's up to the owner to do what they have to do to be able to replace the carpeting. Now, that said, we also say that you have to be reasonable about it. If you have 4 baby grand pianos in your living room, that's not really fair to ask the landlord to move all of those. And there can be ways to work these out. Maybe they move it to another room, to do.
Well, that's what we had said. Why don't we do one room, move to the next room and all that? Okay.
As I said, there isn't an exact answer.
So try to mediate with them about, because we've also, like her, we want to put floors in. And we are also said we're willing to pay for the materials if they pay for the labor.
That sounds like a good,
Is that?
harmonious relationship.
Okay, now, my second question though has to do with lease. Our kids are now grown. They are on our lease as roommates and tenants. What can I do to protect them to keep the apartment?
Well, those things are very, very specific. It's not really maintenance related, so I would ask you to contact our office with that specific question. Okay? All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wan-Chi Cheng, Dr. Wan-Chi Cheng from the County Health Department.
Hello, everyone. I drive from Ballpark Park. That's where our headquarters is. And I learned a lot from him. I never lived in a place with a rent control, so I really learned a lot. By the way, I've been working for the county health fund for in the 21st years. So our division's name is called environmental health. The public health services got 17 divisions, and EH is one of them. We got a staff 800 plus staff. We do restaurant inspection, apartment building inspection, and we do tattoo, gel, and we collect water pool. We go to landfill. We even go to garment clothes manufacturer, so we do a laundry inspection. We're constantly running in the field. I've been working in the field 18 years now. I'm working called a program called consultative services. In the first presentation like this, I got very nervous, but this is probably the I don't remember how many presentations I've done. And I got a little accent. If you cannot hear me clearly, please ask me. And I graduated from the University of Arizona. Been studying there, got my master's degree, doctorate degree, in 1996. So, all right. We have a phone there. If you can call us anytime. Not only about housing, you can call about your relative open a restaurant, and anything like a cottage food, anything like micro enterprises, cooking at home, you can call that number. So we have a housing inspection as a program, and which is in the district office. So we have 29 district office who's doing regular routine inspection on food, housing, restaurant, market every day. We also have 3 complaint taking offices. They only do complaint. So that may including all health code violations from multiple family dwelling and single family dwelling. Anything, any units, 5 or more units, we call multiple family dwelling, and it's all record. And anything less than 5 units, we only do inspection complaint based. So EH is representing for, it stands for environmental health. Our responsibility and services, we provide like routine complaint inspection services. And we're talking about, we're going to go over like authority, why we can do it. And compliance and enforcement, we're going to, how we enforce the laws. And we're going to go over owner's responsibility and tenant's responsibility. I just talked to Amanda, so the audience here is, there are some landlords, there are some tenants. I just heard that few ladies asking questions. Okay, house inspection report, we're gonna mention that very quick, okay? I just mentioned that we have a 29, total 32 district office. The name, the whole name is called District Surveillance and Enforcement. To ensure the residential housing with LA County is safe, sanitary, and a fit for human habitation. By the way, you may wonder why LA County is doing the inspection. There are like 88 cities and incorporated areas throughout LA County. Over the LA County area is like over 4,000 square miles. And the county agency has a contract with each city except 3. Pasadena, Long Beach, and Vernon, they have their own health department. So we do we're routine and complaint inspection of apartment building with 5 or more units and swimming pools. So we check the pH level of the swimming pool, make sure the main drain is visible from the deck. And also respond to concerning housing of 4 units or less. That's what we call a single family dwelling. Okay, so we do regular routine once a year for kind of like A, B grade unit. And for any apartment building with a very bad condition, we put it into a C grading. We have to go there twice a year. And besides vermin problem, we check almost everything. If we find anything like building code violation, we refer to other like building safety. Okay. So we investigated citizen complaint, anybody with a phone call, we put it into 2 categories. First, if it's really kind of like a green pool, anything like plumbing issue, we'll have an inspector within 3 business days. If some other issues, we send letters. Okay. Okay, so I just mentioned we make referrals to other agencies such as building safety, vector control district, fire department, and zoning. We enforce LA County health and safety called Title 11. You can Google that, and hasn't been updated for a long time. And the crowding level has been there for quite a while. That's upper limit like that, according how many people live in how big a space. So we really need to update that code. Public house license required for multiple family dwelling. When if you're a landlord, you will probably, when you receive the property tax, you will see fire hazard, vector control, singular valley vector control, county public house license, And 1% probably is the basic one, and then we'll generate like a 0.2%. That's all like influence school district. That's part of them is county house medicine. We don't really. Our percentage is so small. The county Title 11 is the one really based on to make routine inspection. Okay, and we can have the right to entry, but of course, we have got permission with the people who are living there, who's old enough, like 18 years plus. If only kids at home, we cannot get in. We enforce Title 11, also enforce California Health and Safety Code, and all other related, code. I mentioned before, inspection frequency is based on the risk level, just like a restaurant. Some restaurant we inspect 3 times a year. Like McDonald's, we only inspect twice a year. Starbucks, liquor store, we only inspect it once a year. But this one, the house, 5 units or more house, it's not that complicated. We have A, B, C housing. We don't post rate there. But A, B, we do once a year. We lock like 10 to 20% doors. Say, for example, 100 units there. We try to tell the inspector to lock at least 20-some doors. And besides, our common area, we definitely have to check it. But individual units, we have to try to do, see who's at home, of course. And for those people visibly at home, we'll try to lock the door, try to talk to them and say anything violations. And all those inspections are not announced. We won't tell the owner. Sorry, landlord. We won't tell the owner. We're going to be there and do the inspection. We definitely inspect common public areas like trash bin area, swimming pool, the fence of the swimming pool, make it safe, like an laundry room, make sure it's clean. There's no holes, there's no burning in laundry room. Of course, driveways. We make sure there's no trap hazard. We check the fire extinguisher. If it's broken, we refer to the fire plumber. So we can only inspect available units. We don't got a search warranty, inspection warrant from the court. So we only inspect available units. So the inspector carry lots of tools, flashlight, and some test paper, and we used to use the roach router and try to, scare the cockroaches out, but we're not allowed to use that anymore. We test pH level of the swimming pool. So once the inspection done, the inspector will put all the violation issues together and email right now. So email to the owner. If the owner has no email address, the inspector will come back to the office the next day, print out the report, and email to the owner's address on record. And it's usually about 3 weeks re-inspection. If there's no we cannot go there to the re-inspection earlier, only on that day or later. So if the inspector found out no, the owner didn't do anything, or 50% less, the inspector definitely will issue a hearing. And before the inspector issue the hearing, he gotta make sure if there's any possible, make sure the email was received well, it's not rebounded. Make sure the owner has a phone number to contact, talk to them for what's the reason. The owner say, well, I already got it. Some of the things like switching window, it's a special custom-made window, take a long time. So the inspector probably will give more time to do that. May not issue a hearing. So it's kind of flexible. And with the second re-inspection, still nothing done, so we'll refer to the city or district attorney. And meanwhile, we'll refer to the franchise tax board will be charged for all those reinspection. And the last resource is court. You know, we have a housing task force is really kind of like for slumlords. I say, I hope there's no slumlords here. Okay, so they are kind of like help all district office to prepare a court case. That's all the things addressed by EH, and it's also on Title 11. Insects, pest, okay, vermin, insect pests, including cockroaches, flies, and all those things, mosquitoes, things. Vermin, rodents, cockroaches, bed bugs, okay. Can you believe it? Bed bugs being extinguished back in 1972, long time ago. Now it's the bed bugs come back. And then the mosquito, the Asian type mosquito is come back, beating everybody. It's kind of it's become worse before it become good. Maintenance, the gentleman just addressed lots of maintenance like that. We also cover sanitation. What is the sanitation? You can put everything under sanitation. And what we're talking about here is kind of like how a apartment building apartment was maintained. And the mold issue we're going to go over very quick. I mean, sewage problem, inadequate ventilation, swimming pools, peeing pen, overcrowding. Today, too many issues. I'm gonna focus on two issues: bed bugs and mold issues. Okay. I hope either Nano or Tenants, you in City of Santa Monica, you haven't encountered any bed bugs. It's bad things. It doesn't carry disease, but it's really annoying. It's public hazard. So it's bed bug only preferably suck human blood. If there's no human blood available, they will attack that dog's cats. But they were definitely the first choice human blood. Okay. Without human blood, they will die. They will survive long, probably more than a month. Okay. Some research said 48 days, some said 32 days. And look at those. The crowds and move easily from place to place. Okay, so they don't really spread disease, but it can cause lots of different reactions: asthma, anemia, stress, financial burden, housing code. Of course, it's house code violations. Okay. How do you get rid of the bug? So it's covered at least for like tenants, owner, pest control management, and house departments cooperation. The tenants has to do their own rules, and building management own an annual or property manager. By the way, all of a sudden I was kind of idea. How many of you knows in California for apartment building, the landlord has to put a manager on site? How many of you knows that's the 16 units more? Very good. Yeah, I guess that's kind of an idea. 16, if 15 units or less, 5 units between 15, then don't have to put any outside manager. So if you happen to live in an apartment building with a 5 units or more than 5 units, less than 15 units, you are probably, it's very hard to find a manager, but you gotta make sure you have the landlord's phone number or the landlord's representative. Okay. Okay. Housing inspector, we are just like the government here in the Santa Monica got involved. You know, when I went to UA, my major in cont. So when the market does not working good, the government got involved. Okay, that's why. pest management professionals, okay? Owner's responsibility. So, like the gentleman said, owner is always finally responsible, okay? The rental unit must be habitable and complies with the state and local building and health code, okay? Of course, you know what does that mean. And you cannot rent out your unit and sign an lease agreement with the tenants when there's no electricity, when there's a hose, when there's no toilet. And a repair or replace damaged structural, electrical, and plumbing. That's all the things you have to make sure is habitable, human habitable, okay? Okay, maintenance work to keep the rental units livable and habitable. There are some like 21 categories in Title 11 listed. And anything of those is violated, it will make it a substandard building. And unlivable, inhabitable means contains a net hazard. Net hazard, probably everybody know. It's only hazard. Any building built before residential, before 1978, when the people building the make construction, the net construct is over too much net added into the pen. If people, when I first come to this country in 1987, when I go to the gas station, it says add natted gas. I said, well, the gas used to add a nat. So it's unnatted gas, he said. Okay. So a structure has inadequate sanitation or nuisance problem, including this construction he mentioned, endangers health, life, safety, property, or welfare of the occupants. Tenant's responsibility. You may wonder, is the house department is just go after the landlord? Not really. If we do inspection units and the tenants open the door, once the door opens, the inspector will smell a strong cockroaches. And once they get into it, they cannot find a place to put their food. You know what does that mean? That tenant is not correct. Okay, so we got to write a notice violation to the tenants as well. Okay. Okay, so tenants have to repair all damage that are caused by you, your guests, or pets. Okay. In the place I live and or nearby, or the place I used to, the landlord charge deposit for any pets. I don't know what about this city. So the tenant has to maintain good housekeeping, do laundry regularly, and do not hoarding and pack rest. Never pick up old mattresses or old furniture from sidewalk. That mattress may contain bed bug eggs. So you never know, or cockroaches eggs. So how do you get rid of bed bugs? Okay, let's take a very quick look, okay? Okay, before treatment, if you find there's a bed bug, tell the building manager, okay? Clean your room, your closet. Because bed bugs most likely living within your bed, 8 to 15 feet. That's why I call it bed bugs. They don't call room bugs. They don't call anything, it's bed bugs. So you have to do laundry and bed items. Why? The bed bugs will be killed, not by insecticide you bought from Home Depot or by any professional pest control. They will be eliminated by heat. There are so many studies as it's 122 Fahrenheit or 125 Fahrenheit or whatever, but as long as the steam is over 130 Fahrenheit, you will be dying. So when you do laundry, make sure it's hot. Okay, they will kill the night bed bug and the egg. So you make sure, because you want to get ready for the pest control company, so you can clear your bookshelves, because that's where the bed bugs like to lay their eggs, okay? Empty drawers and leave open. After treatment, check items before placing back in the drawers or keep them in plastic bag. If you find out there's some of your clothes being cleaned and dried in the hot heater, don't push it back into the plastic bag. Even plastic bag hold the old used one. The bed bug don't like the surface of the plastic, but they may still have some residual eggs there, so be careful. Always use new. Place encasement on mattresses and box spring. Can you believe it? If you have a mattress, this is good for the landlord. If you have mattresses, you have encasement, which is made of the material either close to plastic, the bed bug won't be able to crawl into and lay eggs there. Okay. And clean regularly. Building managers, of course, building managers first of all notice tell all tenants, because bed bugs, if you live in an apartment building, if you treat one unit, the bed bug may move to the next one. So they have to tell all tenants and contact pest control company, okay? If you really know how to do it, you probably, if you got a license, you can do your own, of course. Communicate with the tenants, housing inspector, and pest control managers, okay? After treatment, that's the owner yourself or the manager on site, and talk to tenants, housing inspector, and pest control managers. These days, when the tenants sign in, the landlord usually what? Have a one-page flyers and attached to that lease agreement. And if you want one of those, you can either call me, that's the number you can get a hold of me. I will, if you don't really want to develop or write your own flyers, materials, and brochures to tenants, I can email that to you. How do you get rid of the bed bugs is housing inspector roles in this kind of situation. Before treatment, write a housing notice to document where the night bed bugs were found. Okay, that bed bug doesn't count. So when the inspector doing the inspection, they have to find night bed bugs. Give educational materials to management and tenants. That's the things I'm talking about. I can always email the electronic version of that educational materials to you, landlord or tenants. Make a verbal recommendation to tenants. Tell them how to take up the bed bugs to prevent bed bugs. Okay. Write notice violation. Well, sorry, we'll put it that way. There's always a notice violation. Okay. Excess clutters is to the tenants. Okay. After treatment, so we do the same thing, give educational material to management and tenants, communicate with tenants and PM, because you don't want that place will attract bed bugs again. Okay, that's a pest control professional. That gentleman is, it looks like holding a fire torch. It could be a steam gun, okay? Okay, have you read the news? And it's happened about half a year ago in Louisiana, where some tenants got really fed up with the bed bug. He used fire torture to kill the bed bug in his garage, and it caught fire. It's that really kind of annoying. So before the treatment, that's their responsibility, because that's from the pest control manager. Inspector room, sometimes take about an hour to finish the inspection, depending on how big the room is. Use the best methods available to clear property of the bed bug. And then the inspector of the tenant they will contact the health department. Okay. So after the treatment, inspect rooms after treatment. That's what they should do. Okay. Make sure all dead bugs, including eggs, is gone. Okay, so we're gonna talk about, no matter whether you're tenants or landlord, so we're gonna talk about how to prevent bed bugs. Keep your home clean, get rid of clutters. You throw away those things you don't need it. You may think about it, I want to keep this for my grandson, or you really think about it again. Okay, vacuum carpets and furniture weekly. Okay, that my wife don't even do vacuum weekly, monthly. Okay, change bedding weekly. That's my wife did very good. Bedding. So check soil or bedding and mattresses for black spots or streaks of blood, then indicating the bed bug is living with you and they don't never pay rent. This, yeah. Next thing, that's a very bad infestation. So how do you prevent bed bugs? Look for signs of bed bugs while cleaning. On mattresses, that's where they come from. On and behind head borders, you know what is that behind it? Turn it over, you look up, move a little bit, you see a lot of lots of eggs or bed bugs there. Inside drawers, the drawer usually is very close to where your bed is, within 8 to 15 feet. Inside holes in walls, inside torn wallpaper and carpet. That's why, because the wall usually have right behind your headboard. You definitely will provide a very nice place for the bed bug. Okay, you always check new and used items before bringing them home. Furniture, clothes, and other items. Okay. That's a kind of common sense, right? But this one is kind of like, be careful. This is about when you travel, when you live in a hotel, when you bring back those home, you gotta be careful. Okay, the suitcase or duffel bag, make sure don't bring that into your bedroom right away. Okay, make sure everything is clean. Make sure the clothes you use, back it up, put it into the laundry room. How do you prevent bed bugs? That's what I said. After the trip, keep luggage away from bedroom. Check luggage for signs of bed bugs. Unpack, wash, and dry everything on high heat. Okay, we're gonna move into the mold factor. Okay, so mold is fungi. It's everybody when they heard about mold it's kind of orange been left there for a long time, about a week. The mold will grow out of that. So mold need water and organic item to grow. Okay. And mold is everywhere. Nobody can absolutely tell me, say, there's no mold spore in this room. Okay, nobody can say there's 100% mold spore free in this room. Nobody can say that. Okay, so mold lives on organic matter. Molds are found everywhere. Okay, moisture is essential for mold growth. So in California, weather is sunny and it's dry, the weather is dry. And compared to the northern one like Seattle, Idaho, or the house over there is kind of like costs more money to maintain because the weather is horrible. I mean, not horrible, it's worse than California. And it's very easy to deteriorate because of the moisture. And mold grows at room temperature. And by the way, I'm kind of like, because we did like interim housing inspection for the homeless. I was asking a question, I'm thinking about it, and I figured out why California, especially Southern California, there are so many homeless. They said, hey, it's a common sense that most of them from out of state. I mean, they cannot serve winters in Canada. They cannot serve winter in New York or Boston. They moved to California. Do you agree with that? So the majority of the homeless people probably from out of state. Sorry about that, this is out of there, okay. So mold is inside the house is water leaks, okay. The landlord and the tenant has to pay attention to the water leaks. And be careful, very watchful with your kids, especially young kids. After you use the toilet, after you use the wash basin, make sure they turn off the water. Make sure they don't play with the water faucet. Okay, so condensation on walls and window sills. So that's why the ventilation is very important. If in a single family house or one bedroom apartment building, and it's 800 square feet, and you have 8 people living there, so the most likely the bathroom being used like almost continuously. And especially when in the winter, you leave the window closed because you don't want the cold air comes into your house. So most likely you have a lot of condensation on walls and windows. So after a few days, you will find out black spores will starting to grow on the wall. Mold smells awful, okay, and it's especially irritant. Is you will feel like coughing. You will feel people call what allergic reactions. In the time, few of my friends will already tell me I have kind of like very severe allergic reaction to the weather right now. Okay. But right now, there's no scientific study shows it shows the mold or anything contact mold with mold is cause of pronoun health effects. Okay, and there's quite a few health symptoms which you cannot state. Even the doctor cannot tell what is caused by the mold or by something else. Okay. Mold produce some chemicals. Okay, there's so many different kind of mold. Okay, 350 to 400. Okay, fungi toxins. Mold is in soil, in grains. When you got something grains at home, pinto beans or rice or anything, it may contain spores. Okay, or even house dust, like what I just mentioned in this room. Different mold produce different toxins. And not all toxins are toxic, it's harmful. So, this is our official housing inspection report. Okay, the county will hire new employee staff and will train them on these kind of forms. This is only one of the 30-some forms we use because for different programs we use some different ones. This one may be used by the district office. We have food inspection report too. We have notice violation, we have observation report. So we put it into different category, and we have the facility name, some apartment building called like wonderful place. Okay. Manager, if there's anything, phone number, owner's mailing address, owner's email address, and then we mark anything. There's the vermin one on the very first one. Plumbing is on the second one. Okay, then electrical, toilet, sinks, bath, shower, all those things will just all the things listed by the Title 11. So the complaint is almost the same thing. If the complaint, if we after for example, inspector just did the inspection last month, and we receive a complaint 45 days later, the inspector will have to go back to do the complaint investigation. Anything, vermin, sewage, green pool. Okay, the supervisor will send the inspector there. Anything Non-food, I mean, we'll send a letter including some not essential, say, single-family house. They said, complain, my neighbor got lots of dog dropping in the backyard. So we will send a letter, okay? We also will make a formal refer to other agents like code enforcement and building safety. Okay. All right, thank you very much for your time, and thank you. If you have any questions, I will go there, over there.
Okay.
Thank you for coming. The question is responsibility for bed bugs. If the management tells and explains and notifies the tenant not to do this and stuff like that, and all of a sudden the tenant gets bed bugs, who is ultimately responsible for?
Ultimate responsible.
I'm sorry?
You said who's the ultimate responsible?
Who is responsible if the tenant brings in bed bugs from their travels? Is the tenant responsible?
Sorry to tell you, the landlord is still the ultimate responsible.
The owner is still?
Yeah, but you can, the county health will respect the lease agreement. Okay, when you sign the lease agreement, if you detail that, and we'll not only hold the landlord responsible, we'll also issue the notice violation to the tenants. So right now, starting several years ago, when the landlord signed the lease agreement, they will issue mold factor sheet, and they will issue how to prevent bad bugs to the tenants as well, besides the lease agreement. Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
How do you prevent or treat bed bugs that get into the carpets?
How do you prevent and treat bad bugs to the carpet? This is a kind of it's not a separate issue because once you get a bed bugs, they will first of all they prefer the wood service, the paper service, duffel bag service. They don't like to stay on glass, any plastic. They will lay the eggs on those, like what I just showed. So if you find bed bugs in that unit, it will not only stay on carpet, it will stay everywhere. Most likely, the carpet is not the one they will choose, because the bed bug, the carpet, people constantly walking there. They will find something very close to the bed, the mattress underneath the mattresses, or holes next to the bed. So, as an experienced inspector, we really find any bed on the floor unless the apartment building has been vacant. The bed bug has nowhere to hide or to go to find lots of sock. Occasionally, we'll find bugs on the floor. Okay. Of course, most of the time, right now, the landlord will probably most likely the ceramic tile or wood floor tile than a carpet. Yeah. Okay.
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 Hi, I have a question regarding actually cockroaches and other pests. I am a property manager and I have a few buildings in Santa Monica. Part of Santa Monica has this whole health craze thing going on. So when we established there is a cockroach problem and we want to get rid of it, a lot of people are deterred by the chemicals that are required to get rid of the cockroaches and instead prefer a natural way to get rid of cockroaches, which doesn't always work. So I'm wondering what the parameters are for what the tenant wants versus what we need to get the cockroaches out.
Okay. If I understand you correctly, so you want to ask how to get rid of cockroaches, right?
Well, my question is more if you get rid of cockroaches with chemicals as opposed to a natural thing, like where's the line drawn to get the cockroaches out? Like, do you have to comply with what the tenant wants in the way of natural treatment, or can you go for the chemical treatment to get them out?
Of course, like what I said, the cockroaches is kind of like it's just like bed bugs. Okay, for people, let me put it this way: it's a very common sense way. For the people really good housekeeping, they do the good things, housekeeping, do laundry, and dump the trash every day. Don't leave any food outside. The cockroach won't come to visit that unit. And landlord's way is to make sure all the cracks, crevices, holes around the plugging, the outlet, or gas piping through the wall, they seal off all those. The cockroach won't be able to travel from one unit to another. And meanwhile, we'll probably say it's very interesting. We have German cockroaches, which will be replaced so fast. Within 1 week, they will multiply so fast. We have American cockroaches. We usually go this big. We stay outside and looking for food, or like the suinine. And also we will have Oriental brown banded cockroaches. Those are very unusual. Most of the time we shoot is German cockroaches. So cockroaches really kind of is a variation. It's been there before human beings here. It won't cause any illness, but it's annoying. It's just like bed bugs. Okay, nobody can tell me TB is caused by cockroaches. Nobody can see that. So now do their own. Like, make sure that everything, the condition is habitable before the tenant move in. Tenant once they move in, make sure they really do good housekeeping. Okay, that's the basic thing. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I see we have so many questions, but in order to have time for the code enforcement presentation, I think we're gonna have to go to that next. I will be around afterward. I don't know if Armand or Dr. Chang can stay a little bit to answer some questions at the end, but I think we do have to move on. But I will be providing the contact information for everyone, so you could be able to contact us after the presentation as well.
Thank you, Dr. Chang and Mr. Dan. Good morning, everyone. My name is Armando Rangel. Yep, still morning. My name is Armando Rangel. I'm the Code Enforcement Supervisor for the City of Santa Monica. And you heard a little bit about rent control from Dan and how rent control is here to assist you, sort of the things that rent control focuses on from a property maintenance standpoint. And from Dr. Chang from LA County, with respects to what they investigate and how they go about investigating and enforcing against the property owner to get them to comply with certain things. Now you hear about me with the Code Enforcement Division here in the city, and I'll be explaining a little bit about what we do, how we do it, what we focus on, in hopes that you then get a better understanding as to what the three agencies do respectively. So let's begin. So the Code Enforcement section, the Code Enforcement Division was created in 2011 to meet the growing demand of code enforcement calls for service that included the following: deterioration housing conditions in Santa Monica, multifamily, construction work without building permits, zoning code violations, building code violations, and other Santa Monica violations that we started to see right around 2011. And that really is when we created the division. And today, our division is comprised of 11 code enforcement officers, 2 lead code enforcement officers who oversee their work, 2 supervisors who supervise the division, and one manager to oversee the entire division. We also have 5 administrative supportive staff that help us put everything together from an administrative standpoint. It's a pretty complex process from start to finish, which we'll get into here. We enforce a large portion of the Santa Monica Municipal Code. In order to manage and organize the workload, we categorize the complaints into 9 different code enforcement programs. And those programs include building and safety related calls for service, tenant harassment related to property maintenance or construction impacts on tenants, nuisances or public nuisances, property maintenance issues, zoning violations, regulated business activities such as a commercial fitness instructor maybe not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or a vendor or a pedicab operator, those sort of things. Violations related to sustainability, our Office of Sustainability and the Environment, and violations pertaining to public work violations, such as parkway violations, trees, trash, litter, and debris, that sort of thing. And then the last program is our short-term or vacation rentals program. And we just added a new program, actually, shared mobility devices. I'm sure you've seen all the scooters out there in the streets. So, sort of an overview of the required maintenance that property owners have to adhere to. Property owners must maintain housing according to minimum standards set by the California Building Code, the California Health and Safety Code, which Dr. Chang spoke about, and the Santa Monica Municipal Codes. The California Building Codes tell us how a structure must be legally constructed, right, from the bottom up. There are a set of rules that specifically set the standards of construction to protect public health and safety and the general welfare. The California Health and Safety Codes is our California state law covering various subject areas of health and safety, including regulations of buildings used for human habitation, also known as our state housing laws. And Dr. Cheng got into those code sections a little bit when he spoke about Title 11, for example. And then last, the Santa Monica Municipal Code, which covers various subject areas that either regulate or prohibit certain type of activity. We'll get into that in a little bit as well. Together, these 3 codes set minimum standards to protect the occupant. Common areas. You heard both Dr. Chang and Dan speak about common areas. We also enforce things in the common areas, and those things include well, first of all, a common area is the area which is available for use by all tenants or a group of tenants. Common areas include, but are not limited to, accessory structures such as garages and storage rooms, carports and parking areas, laundry facilities, common used laundry facilities, swimming pools and their gates and their barriers, fences, walls, hedges, trees, exterior electrical, mechanical, and plumbing fixtures, all located in common areas. All those things have to be properly maintained by the property owner. And as a rule of thumb that we use, all things that were built with a permit and to code must be properly maintained. And if they're going to be removed, they must be removed by way of a building permit, so that we have record that it's gone, basically, and that it's removed properly. The building structure. Earlier we mentioned that about the California Building Codes and how it tells us how a building structure must be legally constructed or built. The building code tells us that a building structure must have things such as exterior weatherproofing, right? A roof, stucco, siding, windows, etc., those sort of things. It has a set of stairs, maybe 2 floors, 2 stories, or some stairs. It has to have handrails and landings that are built in a very specific way to keep people safe and ensure proper ingress and egress and safety. Same thing goes with entryways and overhangs. They're all constructed in a very specific manner. Electrical, mechanical, plumbing, those are all things that must be properly inspected and approved by building and safety and maintained. So buildings must have all these things at minimum to protect public health and safety and general welfare of the occupants, and they must be properly maintained, which is where we come into play. When something is not being properly maintained, people have the right to call into the city for those things that are regulated by the Code Enforcement Division, and we respond to calls for service for those kind of things. Here's a picture of a fire that occurred several years ago here in the city. It's an arson fire that rendered several units uninhabitable for several for several days. The unit occurred on one side of the building, but the fire department had to turn off all the utilities for safety purposes, therefore it rendered the entire building unsafe to occupy. It was yellow tagged by building and safety, and all the tenants were displaced. So it's another thing that we get involved with, fires and other issues that render units uninhabitable. We here in the city of Santa Monica have a municipal code, Santa Monica Municipal Code, section 4.36.100, which is, it has everything to do with temporary relocation and when a landlord is obligated to provide temporary relocation benefits to a tenant. This would be an example of that. We're going to get into it a little more in detail in a few. So let's talk about other building code violations, or examples of building code violations. Construction work without permit, that's a big one in our city. A lot of contractors or just workers in general who try to fix something realize that the problem is worse than just a repair, and so they repair it not knowing or not realizing that now they need a building permit to actually do what they're doing, and we get a lot of that. So construction work without permit is a violation in our city, and subject to enforcement. Construction hours, that's another common one for us. When you do have a building permit in place, you're allowed to do construction between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. generally. I think it changes on Saturday, and then no construction on Sunday. So we often get complaints about construction work happening after hours. Construction related, that could be, somebody mentioned the means and methods plan. So when a tenant occupied building is undergoing some sort of construction, and the construction will impact the tenant or tenants, upon obtaining a building permit, generally speaking, they have to obtain a means and methods plan. And so our planning staff, our building and safety staff, they know how to vet those applications so that if and when a means and methods plan is required, the applicant, the contractor, the owner, they're required to fill one out. It's very detailed. It goes with the permit. The tenant or tenants receive a copy of that means and methods plan, and it's active. They have to respect that plan. We enforce violations of the means and methods plan. So if at any point the contractor goes beyond what's stated in the plan, we respond to those kinds of complaints and take and investigate. Bootleg units, that's when a garage or a storage room is converted into a dwelling unit. We investigate those. Residential substandard housing, that's a variety of things that can happen. Dr. Chang mentioned a few of those things as well. The things that, we'll talk a little bit more about what constitute a substandard housing conditions, but that's like lack of heat, lack of water, that sort of thing. Dangerous buildings, every now and again we have something that happens, maybe a roof that looks like it's going to collapse, maybe a water leak that no one was aware of, and all of a sudden the ceiling caves in, those sort of things. And noise complaints that come from a variety of sources. Habitability. A habitable dwelling unit correctly provides basic protection, sanitation facilities, and access to utilities such as gas, water, and electricity. An uninhabitable unit is unfit to live due to conditions that exist that endangers the life, limb, health, property, safety, or welfare of the public or the occupant. The building official determines habitability. Recently, they gave us the authority, the building official gave code enforcement the authority to render units uninhabitable for a few things. The more obvious things such as no heat and no water or no gas, for example, that sort of thing. So there's a few things that code enforcement can render units uninhabitable for all the other things the building official gets involved, but we take the lead on making sure that we respond to concerns and making sure that the determination is made by whomever needs to make it. And like I said, the building official determines habitability. When a tenant-occupied unit is rendered uninhabitable by the building official, the landlord is required to provide temporary relocation benefits to all affected tenants. So we'll get into the temporary relocation benefits and what that means in just a minute. just to give you an idea of how we prioritize cases. So we receive a lot of calls into our code enforcement office, approximately 9,000 phone calls per year, give or take. Very high volume, and of that, we respond to anywhere between 4,000 and 5,000 calls or complaints that are initiated, cases that are assigned officers. That number fluctuates from year to year, but it's roughly between 4,000 and 5,000. So when complaints are received into our office, they are, of course, vetted by our administrative staff. And if we decide that we're going to open a case, we assign it to an area code enforcement officer, and the officer must respond to the case based on our priority level. So priority 1 complaints are responded to within the same day or next day at the latest. Examples of this is when something happens where a building or a unit is unsafe, or a tenant or tenants are displaced, such as the fire that we showed you in the previous slide. Priority 2 complaints we respond to within 3 days. Those are things such as nuisances, early morning construction, that sort of thing. Priority 3 complaints we respond within 4 days. Those are things such as zoning violations like an overgrown hedge or a visual obstruction of some sort, those sort of things. Priority 4 within 5 days, and those are things such as regulated business activities like a vendor or pedicab or a mobile food truck or a leaf blower violation, something that's happening right now. And oftentimes we respond to those immediately if the officer has time, but because we have such a high volume and we have to prioritize things, that's the priority level. Although I have to say, we've been really good at responding to cases really quickly lately, and it doesn't really take us 5 days to get to any one complaint, by and large, anyway. So once we receive a complaint, when a call comes into our office, like I mentioned, we get about 9,000. It's vetted by our administrative staff. They are very nosy people. They like to ask a lot of questions. They want to know what's happening, why it's happening, who's affected, all the details you can imagine. And it's important that they do that because, as you can see here, there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of other enforcement agencies within the city that we haven't really mentioned, like the fire department, or public works, or water, urban runoff water inspector. So we receive a lot of complaints, we ask a lot of questions, and we either refer it out to the appropriate person or agency, or we open a case and assign it to a code enforcement officer because we've determined that it's a code enforcement violation. So case is opened, it's assigned to the area code enforcement officer. The officer conducts thorough research and investigation depending on the complaint, but they always want to know where they're going, why they're going, and what to expect. Is it a 100-unit building, a 20-unit building, 2 units on a lot? What's going on? That also includes inspecting the property. So whatever the complaint is, we schedule an inspection with the person who called. In this case, it's typically something on the interior of the unit, and we conduct a thorough inspection. When we confirm a violation, well, that's where the enforcement begins. So the officer, the code enforcement officer prepares a notice of violation, which explains exactly what the violation is, the code section that applies to it, and the required corrective action. And then lastly, the amount of time you have to comply. So there's due process, of course. We give the responsible party time, adequate time to comply. And the goal is compliance, of course. If the responsible party fails to comply, of course, we take the next step in the enforcement action, which is issuing administrative citations. So there are administrative citations that comes with a monetary fine. And we issue up to 3. Each one is more than the last. So it's the first citation, the second citation, and the third citation. And after that, if the property owner fails to comply or the responsible party fails to comply, we refer the case to the city attorney's office for further enforcement action, which could include any of these things: additional fines and penalties, an administrative hearing before the hearing officer, criminal or civil prosecution, recording the notice with the county, or a court-ordered receivership or relief. In a nutshell, that's our enforcement process. Habitability determinations by the building official. So habitability, we talked a lot about habitability today. Habitability determinations are made by the building official on a case-by-case basis. We, as I mentioned, code enforcement also has the authority to issue habitability determinations on certain things. Possible reasons for a unit becoming uninhabitable, what are they? So any building or portion of a building which creates conditions that endanger the life, limb, health, property, safety, or welfare of the public or the occupant could be considered substandard. Those things include inadequate sanitation, substandard dangerous wiring or plumbing or mechanical fixtures, or structural hazards. It also includes lack of proper egress from the unit or the property, or lack of improper toilets, sinks, bathtubs, showers, hot and cold running water. Those are all things that could potentially render a unit uninhabitable, which then potentially would require temporary relocation benefits in accordance to the code, the Santa Monica Municipal Code. Temporary relocation continued. So situations where temporary relocation benefits must be provided again, that would be something like every now and again the property owner wants to tent a building and fumigate. They have the right to do that, of course, but the unit is obviously uninhabitable for a few days. So relocation benefits could kick in for that. Construction work that requires tenants to temporarily vacate. So if they're doing some sort of work that requires, say for example, the water to be shut off for multiple days where they can't restore the water at the end of each night or workday, then that may be a situation where temporary relocation may be required to the affected tenants. Building code violations where the city orders tenants to vacate. So we receive a call, no water or no heat, and it's going to be a cold night below 60 degrees. We may render the unit uninhabitable and order the property owner to provide temporary relocation benefits. Or as I mentioned earlier, it could be due to a fire or something like that, unless it's caused by the tenant or the tenant's guests. And then last, we have the temporary relocation benefit amounts. This changes, so we had to update it, but currently, if the situation is can be remedied within 5 days, if we believe that the property owner can correct the violation and restore habitability within 5 days, then the landlord is entitled to either place the tenant in a motel, or provide daily per diem rate at the daily per diem rate. If we believe that it's going to take more than 5 days to restore habitability, but less than 30, then the landlord is obligated to provide either the daily per diem rate, and I'll give you those rate amounts in a minute, or comparable housing. And comparable housing is if there's a question about comparable housing, the building official can determine whether a unit is comparable. If it's going to take more than 30 days to restore habitability, then it's comparable housing or weekly per diem rates. So the per diem rate paid up in a weekly increments. And also, of course, pet accommodations, which is $31 per cat, $57 per dog. The tenant has to continue to pay rent during the period of relocation, so the tenant still has to make their monthly rent. And the tenant is entitled to return to the unit, of course, once habitability is restored and at the same rent amount. Now, I did mention that I was going to talk about the rates. So currently the daily per diem rate is approximately $335 total for one person. It's $302 for hotel, $32 for meal per person, $1 for laundry, $57 for a pet dog, and $31 for a cat. Questions?
Hi, thanks for your presentation. My name's Linda. Okay, so the times when I've reported a complaint, one of the feedbacks that I have gotten from your officers is, did you tell the owner about it? So Just want to throw that out there. But in our situation, even when we do tell the owner, most of the time they are not responsive. And so then, but okay, then my question is, when we do make a report to your department, my experience is it sort of goes out into the ether, and then I never hear back. I don't know what action was taken or not taken, or if my complaint had merit or not merit, or if you guys are getting sick of hearing from me, or what's going on. And then also the means and methods. When we had the retrofit, I felt there was the means and methods were not being followed, and I did report that. But then again, I didn't know there was no follow-up. So I know you guys are really busy, but is there some way we can, check and see what happens with our issues? Thanks.
Yes, absolutely, and thank you for that. I appreciate the questions and the feedback. So we do have, like I mentioned before, we have 11 code enforcement officers, 2 lead officers, 2 supervisors, and a manager. So there's plenty of staff there to hopefully answer your question if you call. We have areas, so the city is geographically is divided into 6 areas, and there's 1 officer in each area. And the reason for that is because we want the officer to familiarize themselves with that particular area and the needs for the area, and 2, so that we can start building relationships with anyone, right? Whether it's a property owner or a tenant or what have you. But if you call our office, they're gonna give you a case number. The case was generated, there's a case number, you call back, and you ask to speak to the officer, you leave a message. And if they don't call you back within a day or 2, call back and ask to speak to one of their supervisors. And maybe they're off on vacation, or maybe they're sick, or maybe there's another reason why they're not, or maybe they're just not calling you back, and we need to get on top of them for that. So definitely call back and let us know. And also there's, remember that this is an enforcement agency, right? We're an enforcement agency, so we take enforcement action. And some of the information that, or some of the action that we take, we can't share with anyone except the responsible party. Because some of these cases end up in court of law. So because of that, we don't want to jeopardize the integrity of the case. We want to keep things as confidential as possible. You're still entitled to call our office, and there is some information that you're entitled to, right? Where are we at with the case? Well, we're in the middle of enforcement action. We're not ignoring you. This has happened, that has happened. We can give you some information and some feedback.
Okay, number 1, must a tenant request problems to the landlord or repairs to the landlord before calling code compliance? Number 2, who enforces the new law regarding wood balconies and engineer certification? And number 3, would you comment on hoarding and sanitation issues?
So number 1, you're not obligated to notify the property owner, although we would hope that you would have asked the property owner or made them aware of a situation before you call us, because we're an enforcement agency. And we always ask if that's happened, because we want to know when, one of the first things we will do is pick up the phone and call the property owner. And if we're aware that they're aware, we can have that conversation. But if they're not aware, then they didn't know the problem, and so we have to provide time and due diligence then at that point. Your second question was with respects to?
The new law on the balcony certification, wood balconies.
That new law, it's more of a building and safety.
Who's responsible to enforce?
Building and safety would be the.
And the third was hoarding and sanitation.
We respond to hoarding cases. Yeah, so the complaints will come to us, same thing happens, we conduct an investigation and take it from there.
So I don't know if this is for him or for you, but it sounds like it's more for you. We've been arguing with our manager for over 2 years. They did some plumbing work, and so we're in a upstairs, downstairs. The bedrooms are upstairs, downstairs is like our dining room, kitchen, all that stuff. There's also a guest bathroom. Since they've done the plumbing, it takes over 3 minutes to get hot water. So A, we're wasting a lot of water. We've told them this over and over. Their excuse always is, well, you're in the back of the building. And I'm like, we've lived there 17 years. We haven't had this issue until you did something. So obviously with the showers, we're gonna wait for the shower. What I've always said to them is, when we have guests over who go to the bathroom, they're always having to wash their, I'm sorry, I had small kids at one point. Yeah, I'm into the hot water thing. You need to wash your hands with hot water. And so they haven't fixed that. Is that something that we finally come to you, or do I keep going through the maintenance guy? Like how do I get them to finally look at the damn pipes?
Well, you said they haven't fixed that. Is there, is it because something's missing? Did a water
I
pump?
don't know,
go
they
down
have
or
brought
something?
out 4 different plumbers, and like I said, the manager, and she's been in the building from the beginning, and since like 1970. And she has our same unit, so she always does the whole, well, we don't have that problem. I'm like, I don't really care if you don't have that problem. I'm having that problem. Oh, it's in the back of the building. Nancy, we had this building, we haven't had this issue, and you guys changed something in the plumbing the last 2 years that now our unit has that issue.
Is there recirculation pump?
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be a recirculation pump. So to answer your question, it's kind of,
Gas company will do it for free, recirculation pump.
yeah. But going back to answer your question, the health department focuses on the sanitation part, so lack of hot water, even though you're getting it after 3 minutes, something you can call them and ask them about. If that's happening because they did some sort of work without permit, and we can prove that or show that, that would be that's when we get involved.
Recirculation.
One more question. Since about 6 months ago, since they are retrofitting the building for over a year, but 6 months ago, the second bathroom we have, the water in the sink comes out from yellowish to brown with specks of metal and a foul smell. I have reported it many times to the managers that are managing the building, and nothing gets done.
You can contact our water department to see if they can help you with
Okay,
that. I believe
thank
they have
you.
someone who can look into that.
And you could also notice the landlord in writing, and if that condition continues, you could file a petition for a rent decrease. Just give them a chance.
You mentioned numbers for, I have my hearing, you mentioned numbers for housing, if a person has, or if a tenants have to be
Relocated?
yeah, and also, what was those numbers for? Was that for the day or? And then you mentioned there's a weekly rate, and what was that number?
So the rate's the same, the daily rate and the weekly rate. So let me run those numbers again. I apologize, I went fast.
And I would just say that you all may have picked up the newsletter from Rent Control, but that was the spring newsletter. And there's always a small percentage increase in July 1st to those relocation amounts. So please check the website, or Armando's got the numbers right now.
It's 302 at night for the hotel.
Right. So your question is with regards to temporary relocation benefits. And the amount is $302 a night for a hotel, $32 for meals per person, $1 for laundry, $57 for a dog if they're going to board them, and $31 for a pet. I'm sorry, for a cat.
Unless you make a separate arrangement with the tenant.
Correct, unless you make a separate arrangement with the tenant. I'm sorry?
Per household. The hotel is per household, the food is per person, and the cat is for the cat.
Correct.
And $1 laundry.
$1
$1
laundry.
a day for
Actually, it would be really helpful to have that information on the website because it's not there. But I have another question. As I mentioned, we lived in a high-rise building. We had a big fire that knocked out both elevators in April. There were 288 units in the building. And we were told, I had actually called code enforcement because we have elderly people or people who are disabled on high levels who weren't able to get downstairs. And I was told by code enforcement they were not eligible for relocation assistance. So I wanted to understand why that would be, or if that was incorrect, how would we go about getting our benefits?
So for elevators, that would be the building official who makes a determination, not code enforcement. And I don't know or remember the specific details about regarding that case.
Building official wouldn't be me because I called code enforcement and I was told that the code enforcement officer had made that decision.
No, code enforcement investigates, they take the lead on the investigation, and then they go to the building official to say, here are the facts of the case. What say you?
You're talking about our landlord, so then our landlord would have been obliged legally to let tenants know about their right to relocation assistance.
If the determination was that the unit was uninhabitable, yes.
Okay, but who determines whether it's uninhabitable?
The building official.
And who is the building official?
We currently Currently, his name is,
And is it building safety?
it's in building and safety. It's in building and safety. I forget his name, if that's what you're asking me for his name, or he is one person within building and safety. He is the head of building and safety.
Can you put that up on the city website as well for relocation assistance, because it makes no detail other than you have the right to it, doesn't say who you.
Dan, I think it's in a couple of places, right?
So, yeah, if you go to the city attorney's website, which is it's smconsumer.org, and there's a relocation benefits link there, and it will take you either to permanent relocation or to temporary relocation.
Unless you make an arrangement with them.
Hi, my name's Candace. I'll try to keep this short, we're running out of time. My first question is, are things like lighting in common areas in your area, in your venue? For example, pitch dark trash cans that are locked, that you go out at night and they're absolutely stone dark.
Yes, there are some lighting requirements, and that would be within our purview, yes.
Okay, thank you. What we ended up doing was going to Fisher Lumber and putting some battery ones up temporarily. Also, the lights help keep the homeless out of our trash and stuff. Also, when people remove barriers, like gates, from the sidewalk to the building and don't ever replace them, is that your area?
It could be if the gate is there for a reason, if it's required. For example, if there's a swimming pool and the gate is there for that purpose, then yes. But if the gate is there, if there is no requirement to have a gate, then they can take it off
Okay.
and not replace it.
And when you talked about around the perimeter, things like broken concrete, is that in your area? Or is that building and safety?
It depends on whether or not if it's a hazard, if it's a trip hazard, if the concrete, if it's a walking path, for example. That's something that we may be able to do something about. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
If there was a gate that was a base amenity and it was removed, then a tenant could file a petition for rent decrease for that reason. Okay? All right, I'll be right back.
But it wouldn't be a code enforcement violation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. What are the requirements for the occupancy of a unit? How many people can live in a unit?
That would be more the Dr. Chang, LA County Health.
Yeah, we understand that it's LA County Health that has regulations regarding that, but I believe it's very generous. He mentioned an 800 square foot unit with 8 people living in it, but I don't know.
Or maybe the fire marshal, depending on the circumstances.
Hi, Armando. I apparently have an open case. I've been told there's a 12-inch by 1-inch beams running all across the back of the house that was added in 1970. I have 2 inches, so this is the first one. The guys came out. It's that corner of the house is where all the cabling from the alley, from the poles, the utility poles in the alley, come into the house. Internet, cable TV, etc. That they were already cited previously for the condition of that board. It's completely dry rotted, and now I have a termite issue in the house where there's piles of termite debris all over everywhere that you guys say you can't do anything about, and the health department says they can't do anything about, and I have 1/8 of an inch of termite debris all over my desk and all over my couch, etc. But this one board outside, I guess it's not structural. All the beams end in it though, and or they're hammered because there's 12-inch beams all through the back of the house. I am terrified that those cables are going to fall on me. They're going to fall on my patio furniture. They're going to fall on my car. And I finally got the landlord to come out and cut away the branches of the tree that were obscuring it. I talked to, I'm trying to think who it was, because I was getting, as you know, because you've been to my house a number of times, I have basically no cooperation with code enforcement at all for 10 years now. And so I don't know now what's happening. The landlord, when they were cited the first time, they came and they put plaster in where the dry rot is and painted over it, and you guys signed off on it. Now all the plaster and the paint and everything fell off in the patio in last winter's rains. and this board is completely rotted. Somebody at your department said to me, well, have Spectrum move the cables. Is that really a good solution? Spectrum doesn't want to do that. Because they have all their boxes and everything there, they've already rewired the house for everything. So I don't understand why I'm having such pushback from you guys, saying that, oh, well, and apparently that case is still open. It's been, I think, 2 months now, I've heard nothing back. So that's one issue. Second issue is, as you know, I've had problems with my HVAC ever since I moved in. Now the landlord refuses to maintain it. I think I've lived there for 10.5 years, the filter's been changed 4 times. My doctor has written letters to my landlord saying, I'm having respiratory problems, God knows what I'm breathing. As you know, most of the outlets in the back house, the back part of the house, the vents, don't work. There's hardly anything coming out. The gas company has come out and they can't cite it because there's no gas leak, but they've given me notices that they usually use to tag saying this thing isn't working right. And yet I'm getting nowhere with you people at all. And when the heater broke completely, I called you people for months. I have a $400 gas bill every month in the wintertime because there's no weather stripping on the windows, the rent control has demanded that they replace it, and because there's no heat in the back of the house primarily, and so there's no.
Is there very specific?
Well, I mean, but, he's been to my house and made his house, and I get no, they let.
I think he's got to do wrong.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think we'll wrap it up. Just a couple of slides to wrap it up. Thank you, Armando, and thank you all for your questions.
Thank you.
Just a couple of things, if you would complete your evaluation form, we appreciate that. I'm just going to skip to, we are going to email this presentation to you all, so you will have the contact information for the 3 presenters. And one thing I just want to let you know about is coming soon, so in the first quarter of 2020, Rent Control is going to be launching a brand new database that we've been working on. Our old database was written in Fortran or in COBOL. It's very limited if you've ever gotten a printout from us. It's sometimes hard to decipher the information that's there. So we're going to be launching a new information system that's going to provide a portal for owners and managers so you can see all of your property information in one place. You'll be able to easily register tenancies or apply for fee waiver applications or kind of all the other forms that you normally file with Rent Control. And we're also going to provide access to the hundreds of thousands of documents that we have scanned in our content management system. So you'll be able to get all of that stuff online. So we do need you, though, to pay attention to our mailings and to sign up for this new service. I think it's going to really take us, into the future. So again, thank you all for coming, and the next seminar is probably going to be the Landlord-Tenant Forum, which is in December. That's a thing that we do with the City Attorney's Office, and so just pay attention. We'll send you an email if you're on our list. Thank you again. Bye. Yes.